Welcome to the 8th episode in Speaking of Poetry. I am Rennie McQuilkin, publisher of Antrim House Books, and it's Antrim House authors who are featured in this series. I'm delighted to be joined today by David Leff. He is a man for all seasons who, besides being one of our finest poets, is also a lecturer, an essayist, a columnist, an environmentalist, a photographer, an EMT, and much more, all of which leaves me fairly breathless. He is the author of 4 books and one in the making to come from Wesleyan University Press this fall. These include Deep Travel in Thoreau's Wake on the Concord and Merrimack, The Price of Water, and Depth of Field, which combines photography and poetry. Welcome, David. We all look forward to hearing a selection of your poetry today.
Thank you very much, Rennie, for that kind introduction and for inviting me here today. I really appreciate it, to have an opportunity to read some of my poems to an audience that I can't even see. My poems are about relationships. They're about the relationship of one person to another, about the relationship of people to themselves or to nature or to the culture and the community around them. I'm going to start with some poems about the relationship of different people to other people. And I'm going to begin with one about my late father who passed away about 1.5 years ago. And this poem is from my new book, Depth of Field, and it also includes some photographs. And next to this poem is a photograph of the famous Cyclone roller coaster at Coney Island. My father grew up in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. And later in life, after he retired from a vigorous antiques business, he bought a farm in Oregon and wound up raising a flock of ostriches, although not to very much success. This is called Stillwell and Surf, which is the famous corner at Coney Island where Nathan's famous hot dog stand is. Stillwell and Surf. After salt air and French fries at Stillwell and Surf, I sent you a goofy photo, my mouth hot dog full, grinning in a crowd among the clamoring signs at Nathan's famous. Over $3 for what cost you a nickel. Like you, Coney Island isn't what it was. Memory abides in a breath-held rush down the steep watery slide of Luna Park Chute the Chute, then darts through a chaos of bodies, clashing calliopes and flashing colored lights to the exit where girl clasping soldiers gladly tossed tickets to a kid starved for speed and wind. Today, people still watch people while strolling the magic carpet planks along that remnant honky-tonk of whirring rides, clam shacks, and yammering barkers. But the idle parachute jump looms like a lonely Eiffel, and apartment towers conceal elation's ghosts at Luna. Wheezing with emphysema in a world contracting to a Parkinson's quake, you know exactly what you've lost and where you've left it. Those distorted mirrors, roller coasters, and ducks in a row you couldn't hit now seem life's true apprenticeship. All you ever wanted was one last ride. I'm going to continue with a discussion of my father, and as in many interpersonal relationships, things aren't always all that great, and growing up was a little difficult at times. This is playing catch. Summer of '67, and I dreamed of grounders and flies, but we tossed a ball only once. You bare-handed, me clown-like in my overlarge Mickey Mantle mitt. Throwing hard and fast, your face a fist. You played like mom's goading was a curve high and tight to the chin. Charge the ball, it won't bite, you yelled at the clumsy, heavy-footed 12-year-old extending the glove like a shield and closing his eyes. Cassius Clay ain't more afraid of the Viet Cong, you said, dropping the ball and slamming the back door. Turning 50, you sent me $50, so I bought a Rawlings to play with my 12-year-old little leaguer. Scented like honeyed earth, The glove recaptured endless Junes of pitch and catch with friends. Reaching for a can of corn pop, a label caught my eye. Made in Vietnam, I read, and dropped the ball. I'm going to continue along the line of personal relationships, but this time I'm going to turn to a poem about my daughter. There was a time when I couldn't read this poem because she went through some very hard times in her teen years, as this poem will explain. But now I'm proud to report she's a very successful college senior on her way to graduate school. So the poem is more a matter of, thank goodness, nostalgia. 15. She's a stone, impenetrable. I look at her as if from the top of a deep well. Far below she sits crouched, arms clutching knees to her chest. Those fathomless dark eyes never gaze at me or glance into the light. She's spinning a hardened, coffin-like chrysalis of despair. When we talk, it's as if I'm a dream shouting to silence. She is a fortress of swirling pain, and my offers of help only amplify her aloneness. What crossed electrical wiring short-circuited the girl who dressed Barbie, belted softballs, and screamed only on roller coasters? Her beauty teases beneath the steely veneer of anguish. I must survive on fat memories of smiles and soft laughter, waiting with tantalizing hope for the power of time, pills, and love. And fortunately, that all worked out. Another poem about personal relationships was written because I realized that very often we can know a person very well, or think we know them very well, and then make a discovery that reveals something totally different than what we had expected and what we had experienced. This is called addiction. Your soft, quiet euphoria was a place I couldn't enter. A secret soothing I hope was worth the time away. Slowly you disappeared, compacted into a deep, hidden silence sounding like the static of radio telescopes scanning the heavens for different signs of life. You left behind the laughter at dinner, our linked arms at the beach, whispers at bedtime. I wish I'd found the needles, the white powder looking like the flour from which you baked irresistible blackberry pies. Stoned on my own hopes and desires, I must have swallowed 100 clues, but the heart hides whatever it doesn't want to know. Fooled by gold rings, I thought you were addicted to me, but all along, you had a secret lover. Now I'm going to transition a little bit, and this is another new poem, but it's this one sort of links the very personal with a larger social context. It's about a visit that I took to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And there's a term in there called Zyklon B. That is the gas that the Nazis used to poison their victims. Shoes. Blame the shoes for my tears. After saucer-eyed, half-toned photos of soon-dead children, images of fenced-in, hollowed-out souls with starved, bird-like bodies, and rough-hewn wooden villages seething with life, destined for blitzkrieg oblivion. After the cattle car, heaps of hair and gold-cloth stars, I cried over the shoes. Randomly piled, cracked, gray, and shrunken with time, in styles and sizes to suit every taste, I couldn't help but imagine the stolen feet they'd embraced. Footwear formed from once living animal flesh, now bent, rippled, and bulging with distinct foot shapes. I saw stillborn remnants of lost lives in those petiform death masks. I resisted reaching for the time-frozen vamps, tongues, and welts, afraid they might be as sharp as barbed wire, melt to tears, or sublimate to Zyklon B. When my grandmother died, I found shoes like these, perfectly shaped to her foot, old-fashioned as Yiddish-inflected English. She'd sailed years before Kristallnacht, New York's harbor sparkling like crystal, like hope. A girl cowering in a fetid ditch, she escaped the blood-spattered rampage that took her parents from a world the war erased. That was the old country, Tatla, she quavered, as I stood near her father's whiskered portrait, proud of my bristly teen cheeks. In America, we don't have beards. Vomited into daylight from the vault of pain, I blinked like a newborn on streets where all men are created equal. Eschewing faces, downward glances revealed ethnicities of loafers, pumps, sneakers, boots, sandals, and flip-flops. Despite decades and thousands of miles, I felt history's heel and the gravity of my own dumb luck. Conscious of every footstep, I walked away in well-fitted shoes. The next poem continues the theme of my grandmother and her relationship to a larger world. She came to this country through Ellis Island, where millions of Americans' ancestors came. And this is about a trip that I made back to that place. It's called Returning to Ellis Island. The vast registry room echoes with shuffling and chattering sightseers and school children. A babble of languages rises like steam to the high-barreled ceiling, and light spills lavishly from tall arched windows. Squeezed into line among the tangle of accents, I imagine my grandmother, her soft, round face filled with wonder and fear as she slowly climbed these stairs and stood at the threshold of dreams. Uniformed men once sorted through people like fruit in the produce aisle. But no one asks my name, where I come from, how much money I have, my occupation or destination. No peering doctors look for a limp or a wheeze. I don't tremble before badges and starched collars in dread of a beating or disappearing. This Plymouth Rock for the teeming millions is layered with memories that have settled like dust. I'm peering into the past, a tourist merely, free to smell the salt air of the sea and leisurely admire the turreted building tricked out in warm red brick and elegant limestone. At the Wall of Honor, I run my finger over the engraved name of this woman whose memory of murderous soldiers and suffocating steerage were sealed on entering the golden door. The immigrant girl was always a stout old lady with soft walnut eyes and a face lined with decades of work and worry. My ears echo with the heavily accented English that was her passport. She frets that I'm here and urges me forward. As long as we're in New York, I'm going to transition a little into a poem that's really more about our social life, our community life as Americans. And this is a poem that is about baseball and is about terrorism, two things that the latter of which unfortunately has become very American. And this is called Extra Innings on Staten Island. At 90 miles per hour, Schaefer's fastball slams with a pop into the deep, leathery mouth of the catcher's mitt. The scent of grilling sausages hangs in summer's searing heat. Brooklyn's Bouchard grounds to shortstop, and cheers rise like smoke into the cloudless sky from this cozy concrete horseshoe of a stadium. Over the outfield wall, massive container ships and tankers carrying bright steel canisters pass as silently as icebergs along the Kilvan Cull. The harbor beyond is herringboned with whitecaps and busy with tugs pushing barges and fishing trawlers with their nets reeled on deck. The boxy ferry crosses and recrosses past the grand green lady as she stands sentry before the city's shimmering cliffs, its mesas and buttes of masonry, its columns of glass and steel that are filing cabinets of humanity. But the twin towers of dark glass still haunt like the pain of an amputee's phantom limb. Anxiety spread like flu on that day when the sky was an azure arc in which a center fielder could lose a fly. We gathered around televisions, repeatedly watching the cartoonish unreality of the plane, the explosions of flame and slowly coiling gray smoke. Fear-contorted faces filled streets darkened by the black rain of debris. Bridges filled with pedestrians. Tearful men and women held pictures of the missing. Jostled by catcalls and shouts, "I'm back with Lovett at the bat." On a hit and run, he puts the ball in play, allowing Grody to slide safely at third. Ties score, and I wonder if Brewer can bunt, can execute the suicide squeeze. He's an unknown on a roster filled with untested names like Coelho, Nutt, Granicki, and Gunnell. Any could be the next Ruth, whose legendary bat will lift a nation. But Brewer's caught looking at a pitch on the inside corner, and I get up to grab a sausage against the uncertainty of extra innings. If you ever get a chance to see the Staten Island Yankees, which are the Class A minor league club of the New York Yankees, I highly recommend it. Even if the game isn't great, you'll have the best view of the Manhattan skyline that you can possibly imagine. As long as we're on the subject of war, I'm going to read a poem about a visit I took to the Vietnam Memorial in Washington with my son. And I'll read this poem with apologies to Robert Frost. You may note some echoing of his poem, Mending Wall. And there's a photograph in this book, this is again from Depth of Field, of my son reflected in that wall. Wall. Something in America longs to love a wall. You walk down to this one, soft grass bermed on one side, black polished granite staring at you on the other, ringing out memories. Marking no bounds, it establishes no divide, neither walling in nor walling out. On a glowering day, drizzle condenses on cold stone and slides along the letters as if rewriting them in tears. We still weep for fathers, sons, and brothers whose names are for the million and faces for a few. We cry for handcuffed innocence. Words blur from our reflections on the glossy slab, our faces briefly overwritten with the dead's names. So we leave stones, flowers, coins, photos, flags, prayers, tokens, marking the pieces of ourselves forever lodged in this mending wall. I'm going to continue on the war theme for a little bit. This is a poem about Ulysses S. Grant, this being the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, or at least its beginning. I think it might be appropriate. Certainly, Grant is an icon of that era, but his courage went far beyond what's usually recorded in the history books, as this poem details. This is called Last Siege. His cancer-rotted throat a rusted stovepipe from decades of stogies. General Grant sat on his porch pouring memories into a yellow legal pad while tourists gawked. Water was liquid fire more caustic than wartime whiskey. Once shouting over snapping rifles and cannon thunder, his voice faded to a weak rasp and dissolved. First in war and last in finance, his family destitute from one business failure marching after another, the man who bombarded Vicksburg into surrender and unleashed ferocious assaults at Shiloh now fought on the battlefield of his own shrunken body. Armed with a pen, he struggled to outflank death with supply lines of cash from a book whose last words would bugle taps. In dark frock coat and black top hat, he marshaled thoughts like troops with words as sharp and clear as military orders, verbs ready to charge with bayonets fixed. Weakened and wasted, caught in the jaws of excruciating pain and the fog of morphine, strength must have come from distant days in brass buttons and blue. Tour of duty over. The agony ended a week before Grant became a casualty. Courage and tenacity saved a family with ink and paper as much as a nation with mini-balls and artillery shells. Cauterized in memory is the triumphant warrior graciously refusing the sword at Appomattox, but the shriveled scribbler is forgotten. Few know who is buried in Grant's tomb. And in fact, that book became a bestseller, the best-selling book in America up to that time, and actually was the financial salvation of his family. A task that he undertook only under great pain. Sometimes icons are formed out of art and not necessarily the result of an individual like General Grant. And this is a poem about what's probably our most famous painting, the one by Grant Wood called American Gothic, the couple with the pitchfork pose before the farmhouse. It's not what most people think. This is called Believing is Seeing. Posed with a pitchfork before a board and batten steep gabled cottage with a pointed window, the American Gothic couple gazes from the canvas in eternal taciturnity. In the hushed, polished halls of downtown Chicago hangs this two-faced symbol of gritty, rural resourcefulness and small-town rigidity. I stand among millions who've stared back, unsure what I'm seeing, caught between a kitsch joke and a culture hungry for something deep, enduring, blessed by high art. A little battered and alligatored with old paint, the structure still sits as Grant Wood sketched it in a whimsical stop-the-car moment. Having already been there without traveling, I walked around, amazed at its sudden three-dimensionality. The sky as pale and luminous as the painter's pigment. I conjured the grim-faced, iconic couple out front, knowing they never lived there, weren't paired or even painted together. But the artist's sister and dentist were destined to stand just beyond the porch, married forever in a sacred, fractured authenticity. Not so much a painting as a mirror. This American Sphinx is Old Glory and Miss Liberty, has marketed cards and television shows, sold cereal and promoted politicians. Patriotic fairy tale more real than an Eldon, Iowa house or two people who sat for their portraits. It tells stories we are starved to hear because what we believe is what we see. I'll now, before we end, go over to one of my favorite topics, which is nature. And I'll read another new poem. Turkey vultures have a bad rap. You hear the word vulture and immediately you've got negative thoughts. But they're also very beautiful gliders, high in the sky. And they're one of the great recyclers of nature. This is called Circles. Soaring like string-free kites, turkey vultures glide in lazy circles with V-wings outstretched to feathered fingers. Soothing, graceful silhouettes, they float on thermals, visible shadows of winds that whistle through sooty pinions. But at roadside they stand like grisly flagmen, picking at blood-spattered raccoons, possums, and porcupines, their fleshy red-pink heads the color of the decaying muscle and gristle they rip apart and devour. Telescopic eyesight and nostrils that smell sour death for miles are a vulture's kite strings tied to lanes of traffic set like a table with decaying delicacies delivered by fenders and tires. ecological undertakers, malodorous ministers of last rites to the unburied. They dispose of the dead, scrub the countryside, and close a circle more spacious than any traced in the sky. I'll conclude with a poem that links nature and community. This is called Constellations. And it's about the constellations one sees in the sky and the ones that are overhead. And there's a photo that goes along with this one. Constellations. In night's moonless deep, I climb cemeteries, hills, steep terraces, my body fading into darkness, a slender shadow among shadows, insubstantial as the shades beneath the inscribed stones. Pumping legs strain against the slope as I fall further into my breath, just a heaving chest feeding hungry lungs. I'm dizzy on the crest, eyes buzzing with sparkling pinpricks of light, a chaotic whirl connected by shepherds who long ago tattooed the sky with images and stories. Overhead, Orion hunts beside his dog Canis, and Hercules forever faces snaky Hydra, who spawn two heads for each one severed. A winged horse gallops across galaxies, a ram's gold fleece glows, and a scorpion, crab, and dragon terrorize the dark. Twinkling in the valley below is a firmament of incandescent sodium vapor and chalky fluorescence spilling from street lamps and windows. These constellations gossip about women hiding bruises, couples holding hands at dinner, babies conceived in backseat trysts, buddies gathered for a beer and boasts behind pretzeled neon. And then children who lug textbooks and learning disabilities to school while dreaming of Fenway's outfield. Staring into two worlds, blinking at each other, I make a wish and realize that at last I've caught my breath. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You've taken us into two worlds of your own very special view of things, and we've had a full feeling of the uncertainty of extra innings and all the terrors of the modern world and the world at large. And we've also seen that those vultures in the sky and probably down here below can have a strange beauty of their own as they circle, just as your constellations circle in the sky despite what may be below. And we've seen General Grant writing his memoir despite terrible pain, and we've been given the hope of that versus the uncertainty of those extra innings. I want to thank the producer of the show, Ken Picard, and the wonderful station manager at SCTV, Karen Handeville, and welcome you all to read more about David Leff on the Antrim House website, antrimhousebooks.com, and perhaps read some more of David's poems and visit some other poets at the same time. And do come back next month for the 9th episode in Speaking of Poetry.